The objective of these forums are to inform and educate our alumni and provide you with information that you can use to determine how you might drive positive change within your sphere of influence.
It is our turn to let freedom ring. And what I'm going to say to the 1,200 or so, or approximately the 1,200 graduates and friends of Leadership Akron and all their programs, it is our challenge to take our turn. It is our turn to be servant leaders that we were trained to be. It is our turn to be leaders and agents of change in the Akron and Northeastern Ohio community. It is our turn to be fearless advocates of diversity and inclusion in the organizations that we lead. I'm challenging you today to use the leadership skills that you've acquired in your lifetime and honed with your Leadership Akron experience to have the skill and the will to address these very difficult issues and have the necessary difficult conversations that we all have to move forward on this issue.
Residential segregation is the source of so many problems, health, economics, but criminal justice is one of them. I mentioned to you before that some of the bad outcomes come just because you're stopped more frequently. And one of the reasons you're stopped more frequently is not just because of either implicit or explicit bias, it's because some neighborhoods are policed more heavily, right? If you live in the wrong neighborhood, and I don't mean that it's a bad neighborhood, right? I just mean if it's the neighborhood that is unlucky enough to be policed a lot, right? You will get stopped, and the chances that there will be a bad outcome are gonna be greater. Residential segregation is not based on choice. It's not just the market and who can afford houses where or who wants to live with who. And sometimes as a default, if we don't sort of not aware, right, we might think, oh, that's just natural and people are sort of living with where they want to and you know, why should we disrupt that? There is a long history of the federal government explicitly, and local governments too, right, explicitly creating segregation, subsidizing lenders and developers to develop housing in a segregated way, right? Limiting loan guarantees based on sort of the neighborhood that you lived in, and neighborhoods that were predominantly Black were redlined, right? And deemed not worthy of investment or protection, right? And exclusionary zoning, right? Where we tried to make sure that you can't bring in affordable housing into particular neighborhoods and suburbs and cities, and realtor practices, right? Where people were steered and houses were churned so that white people would leave and we would make a lot of money out of doing that, right? And during that time, it was unquestionably consciously true, right? That police departments were perceived to be appropriately policing those people staying in those neighborhoods. The different communities have different community histories, right? So even if you don't know all that history, you inherit it. You inherit it in the folklore that you learn. Granddad hates the police. They gave me the talk about never trusting the police, right? Oh yes, always go to a police officer. You can always trust them. If you heard that, right, likelihood that comes from a lifetime of experience that originated in a time when the discrimination was explicit and held to be justified. I would just recommend that we not judge based on what the system looks like now. Sometimes people are asked the question, do you want more policing or less policing? And if my answer is only based on the way policing exists in cities now, a lot of people are going to say yes, right? Because Black community relationship with policing is complicated. Black people are also the victim of more crime. They usually want more policing, right? They just want it to be better, right? And so if the question is just more or less, the answer might be more, but maybe we can start to ask questions about, well, what would it actually take to have resources to deal with potential violence, right, that are on a different system.
You know, we certainly had many protests here and demonstrations, and almost 99% of them have been all peaceful, all law-abiding functions. We've had very few arrests, very few incidents of property damage, and that's really in large part due to the resolve of the people participating in those functions, but also it mirrors efforts that we've made in advance to not only communicate to some of the demonstration organizers and communicate, find out what their expectations are of us, and we can kind of share some of our expectations of them, and we think that that's led to some of the positive results. It's something that collectively the leaders of the police department, the shift supervisors are constantly reinforcing those themes. You know, the tenets of our mission statement are shared with officers on both divisions of the police department almost daily. But community policing as a concept is nothing more than not only getting out, spending time, taking the initiative to know your community, the people that you police, the residents in your community homes, getting to know them on a one-on-one basis so that there's a partnership with respect to how the problem is solved, and giving them a slice of that pie, if you will, or an opportunity to have a role in that outcome. That is, in essence, community policing concept. Now, there's always room for improvement, and I want to underscore that, and that my message is not to leave anyone with that Akron has it all figured out. I think the important thing is that we're at the table and we're all ears, and we're willing to continually have conversations, be part of change moving forward.
I think that the terminology defund the police is very unfortunate. I don't think it transmits what the initial perspective is of the many people who are putting that forth. I think they're talking about reallocating funds, organize. Perhaps we need to look at different ways to support the police, different ways to augment, different ways to divide up the responsibilities that might give us better outcomes, things of that nature. But the terminology defund sounds like we're going to get rid of the police. And I don't think that we're going to be able to get rid of the police, because we have to have some policing force in society and in communities. When you look behind you and you're driving, a lot of people don't know that there is a blind spot in your rear view mirror. So when you look to the left and you look in that rear view mirror, you think you see everything, but there's a blind spot there. The decision you make on the basis of that information, that blind spot, can be devastating to everyone around you, including yourself. And so when there is an unconscious bias, when there is a blind spot, even of good people, it can be that the information or the decision made on that information can be devastating. So let me just touch on these. Minorities, this is the impact of unconscious bias, are consistently shot by the police more than whites. More pain medicine is given to whites than minorities. More prison time is given to those with dark skin, thick lips, and broad noses. This can be proven statistically. Housing opportunities are offered less frequently to minorities than whites. And thin people are treated differently than heavier people. You can go on, and we are standing at a crossroads. We've stood at this crossroads numerous times before. We've gotten some redress, but then we go back to the default position. We are talking about it. We are discussing it, where people are at the table. I think strategic, systemic, legal redress will help us for the long term. And this is a critical moment. This moment's not going to last.
So if you are at all moved to support the move for reform, really the time is now to jump in. You may not feel like you're ready. You're ready.